Before we get into today's show, I wanted to thank you so much for being a listener of our podcast, the CTO Studio. We wanted to invite you to come to San Diego, October 25 and 26. We're going to grab a whole bunch of CTOs from around the world to spend time together. 2 jam-packed days, leadership, technology, innovation. We have a special surprise for you. Coupon code for the CTO Studio listeners. The coupon code is the CTO Studio. Just go to our conference website, o111conf.com, and get your tickets. And we'll see you soon. Please come, say hi. Bye. Welcome to the CTO Studio. This week we speak to Chris Doig, the author of Rethinking Enterprise Software Selection, Stop Buying Square Pegs for Round Holes. Great insights into how to buy software that leverages and builds out your company.
Well, I have a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
Welcome to the CTO Studio. I'm your host, Etienne de Bruin. The CTO Studio is where we chat with CTOs building amazing products with incredible teams. Have you chatted with a CTO lately? Welcome to the CTO Studio, Chris Doig.
Thanks, Etienne.
Doig.
G.
Is that Dutch?
Scottish.
Scottish. Have you been to Scotland?
No, never.
I'm going there next week.
Oh, lucky you.
I'm going to go there to do a road trip with my wife and my mother-in-law, and we're going to go to the Isle of Lewis.
Oh, wonderful part.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about that. So
Yes.
How far away Scottish are you?
Apparently, my father's father worked on a steamship to get down to South Africa.
Wow.
And but he died when my dad was 4, so we don't know any history there.
Interesting. If you want, I can do some scouting for you.
Yeah.
If you found, do you know any towns that you're from potentially? Nothing.
No,
Okay.
no.
So are you from this beautiful country called South Africa?
Indeed, yes.
Are we both South African?
We are both South African.
Except that I was from the wrong part of the country.
No, Stellenbosch is a wonderful
Well, Johannesburg.
part. Oh, fine. But you repented when you went to...
Yeah, so I met you a few months ago. You had just written a book, which we'll absolutely get into, and the reason you're with us, a problem that many CTOs face is sort of software selection and how to increase productivity through various tools. But I do want to, right before we came on the show, you mentioned a tool that you like to use to sort of align technology with business values. Why don't we just jump into that and kind of talk about that a little bit?
Okay, any business involves doing things, and you've got to figure out what to do. So the purpose of the mission and the vision of the business is to guide the settings of your objectives and your goals, etc. And people don't realize this, and if you ask them what's the difference between your vision and your mission statement, they can't tell you, they can't articulate it. And really, what it boils down to this is a mission and a vision, they're synonyms for the same concept. It is something that you can't achieve except in a trivial sense. So if your mission is to travel, you plan a trip to Scotland, that was your objective. But when you get back, your mission still exists. And you can decide to travel to Cairo next year and that kind of thing. So let me give you a real example of that. In the late 80s, early 90s, Microsoft had this so-called vision of a PC on every desktop and in every home. And when they achieved it, around about 97, 98, they didn't know what to do. And that's when Microsoft basically lost their way in the marketplace. And they pulled in Steve Ballmer, who was an execution guy, not a visionary. So what Steve wanted to do was make more stuff and sell it. But it didn't, the market wasn't interested. Steve Jobs, on the other hand, when he joined Apple or rejoined Apple in about 97, in his own words, it was rudderless, adrift. And Steve Jobs' mission was to make technology accessible to the everyday person. So he introduced the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, and each time the mission remained in place. And that's how he was able to turn Apple into the most valuable company in the world. And it's interesting because in about 97, I think Microsoft put about $300 million into Apple to keep it afloat. And if they hadn't done it, would have died. And but what it boils down to is the vision organizes the objectives, the goals, the things you can achieve.
It's like Starbucks, which was wanting to be the third place.
Yes.
Is the third place.
Right.
Between home and work.
Yes. Yes.
So speaking about the tool, so vision, mission.
And then there's values. So you ask yourself, what are the values? What are my personal values? What are your values? And the function of the mission and the vision in the middle is to translate the values into objectives and things you can do to express those values. So when you've got the values of the business, the vision, the mission to guide the setting of the objectives, and you make sure everything fits in that, then the whole lot comes together and you keep everything aligned.
Fascinating, because I was in a conversation recently with a founder, a CTO founder, who had some investment challenges in terms of an external party that wanted to invest in their company. Mm-hmm. And they were having co-founder conflict on what to do with that, should they or shouldn't they? And she was asking me, how her founder is asking her, well, give me some good reasons why we shouldn't take this investment. And she was tactical about it, like, well, is it the pros and cons and the, mm-hmm. And what I took her back to was, well, maybe you should revisit your vision and your mission so that you can sort of take a step back and understand, well, why does this company exist? What does success look like for us? In other words, what are our values? And then see if this opportunity aligns with that. And then take the whole, he said, she said out of that conversation.
Yeah, going on with that, I mean, if the vision of the investor is basically a flip, a short-term investment, pump and dump type thing, whereas the company has a much longer-term vision, those two are completely against each other.
So is this something that you do when you go into organizations to help them? We'll dig into exactly what you do, but is this a key part of your process when you go and do your consulting?
No, it doesn't. Okay. It comes in sometimes, but really it's something I've used over the years to help develop my company. And interestingly enough, it started off with a former boss of mine who was Afrikaans, actually. And he didn't like me because I was English. He said, do it this way. And I was totally against him, but I came around 180 degrees and realized what he was saying was actually perfectly correct.
That's something my dad says to me, is eventually you come around and know that I was right.
Yes.
I think Afrikaners like to say that. I love my dad. So I'd love to know how you ended up in the US. But before we go into that, you founded a company called Wayferry.
That's right, yes.
When we spoke a couple months ago, I was really intrigued by your mission and what you want to do as a company in helping CTOs and CIOs of large tech companies. So maybe tell us what Wayferry does, and then I would like to get into the book you wrote.
Well, if we go back a little bit from that, what motivates me personally and why I founded the company is I enjoy helping people. My greatest satisfaction is when I help companies buy the right software and it transforms the business. And I can give you an example. We helped one particular client select call center software. And at the start of the project, I said to the head of the call center, her name was Danon, and I said, Danon, what are you looking for? And she said, in call centers, Chris, metrics are absolutely everything. And I really want a 20% improvement in our metrics, and I'd love a 50%. So we helped them select the software, and they implemented. And about a month after they went live, I went back to her and said, well, Danon, how's it going? And with a huge smile on her face, she said, we've got a 300% improvement in metrics. And for me, that was music in my ears. That's what makes the difference. Now, some people will say, well, we do the work to earn the money to live. Earning the money is a byproduct. It's a very necessary byproduct because you've got to pay your mortgage, etc. But the real satisfaction, what drives me as a person, is helping folks to achieve that.
And the way I experienced this in my career was I joined a biotech company when I moved to the States.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in the IT department. So I went from super cutting edge software, skunkworks labs with network and data encryption to coming over and now rebooting, Microsoft Exchange servers and upgrading Solaris systems.
And what about 21 part 21 CFR Part 11 compliance and all that sort of nonsense if it was a biotech?
It's kind of the 2 steps back to come to the States and live the dream. You kind of took that job. But something I'm super thankful for from that period is it really taught me that the software that people use can make them happy or sad.
Very much so.
And it was only when I started building little scripts and tools to extract data, transform it, either display it in quick real-time pie charts or optimize EDI transactions, where I realized that people, by saving them the mundane work, they literally come to work as different people.
You are freeing them from the mundane and giving them the opportunity to concentrate on where they can be creative, and that's much more rewarding to them.
And so one of the things we discuss as the quadrants of being a CTO, one of them, it's 4 T's, but one of them is tools. And Aaron Contoro, who's a huge friend of mine and of the organization, places a wonderful emphasis on the modernity of tools and tooling and putting those in place so that CTOs can activate and bring out the best in their devs in order to be, in that creative space, as opposed to contending with this piece of software that needs you to do something in a certain way. So is that where Wayferry sort of, where you live?
It was a little bit, but it's actually much more over towards the business. So just as you were talking about tools for dev, I look at it from tools from the business as a whole, which includes dev, and depends how big the business is.
Yeah. So where in the company life cycle do you find you sort of enter the conversation? Is it sort of fighting fires phase where companies have outgrown their own decision-making capabilities, or is it more proactive, or
both? Actually, what happens is it's when the company's life cycle. I originally thought startups would want us, but apart from the fact that startups don't have the money to pay, if you're choosing an accounting system for a startup and you end up choosing QuickBooks because it's what everybody uses, to be honest, it doesn't really make terribly much difference. But if you've got a company of 10,000 people, what accounting system you have in does make a huge difference. And can you get the information out of it? So there's a growth point, and when folks grow out of QuickBooks, what do they go next?
So do you find that the people who approach you are enlightened enough that they need someone like you, or do you find that people don't know that such consulting services exist?
I think it's the latter.
Yeah.
What's funny is, of all the vendors we speak to, because we do quite often, every single one of them says you provide such valuable services. But of potential customers, very few of them see it. And what's interesting is the more involved in IT people are, the more they think they know it all, and they don't realize the depth that is in the subject. And I must confess, I didn't realize it until I started working. And I used to track my time, and I spent over 10,000 hours on this subject over the last few years. And when you do that, you end up learning about it, and you must. And
something that you could do. I know startups might not be your target demographic, but they could be the $1 billion company of the future.
They could.
You could potentially do like a startup package that just says, hey, if you want to bootstrap your startup, and it's in a SaaS platform or it's an agency model, these are the products we suggest you use as a giveaway.
Yeah, that would work. What really happens is people don't know what they need. And, they might know at the 30,000 foot, for example, let's say they're a $50 million company, which is smallish, and they've outgrown the existing ERP system, and we need a new ERP. There are lots of inefficiencies, but they don't know where to go beyond that, and they don't know how to find out what their requirements are. And one of the innovations that we've pioneered, and it comes simply because I am trained as an electrical engineer, is the concept of reverse engineering. So you look at competing products and you rewrite the features as requirements. Let me give you a little example. A few years ago, we were speaking to an organization in the civil engineering space, and they were looking at project management software. And what they wanted was, to improve the efficiency of the organization, that kind of thing. And we went through this reverse engineering process. And this was a time that products like Clarizen, etc., were hitting the market, and they made their tools available on the smartphone. And we pointed this out to the CIO. And he said to me, that's absolutely fascinating. We'd never even thought of that. When we're in a remote site building a bridge or something, trying to get out internet connection to the site office can be very expensive because it's in the middle of nowhere. And secondly, when someone's on site, a project manager, they're going to walk back to the site office to get the information. Now programs like Clarizen make this available on a smartphone. And so that just makes everything work much better. And we didn't even know this existed. And so that's how that reverse engineering techniques helps you find out what's out there.
And so do you require then that the CIO or CTO paint sort of the ideal picture? Or is it impossible because you don't know what you don't know?
Usually the latter. And it really boils down to aligning the technology with the business. What does the business need to do its work effectively? You start off with the pain points, but people obviously know their pain points because they're painful, but they're not software experts, so they don't go outside of that. And the trouble with folks on the IT side of the business, it's the curse of knowledge. They know a lot about IT, but they don't necessarily know a lot about an individual aspect in that. And in terms of things like software selections, they don't do them terribly often. So they've never optimized those processes. Whereas once you get into it and you start doing it a lot like I have, then you discover there's a whole lot of stuff I didn't realize. And here's an example. Terminology. Customers have one set of terms and vendors have another set of terms, all for the same thing. Now, how do you translate from one to the other? And I was sitting working a little while ago, and the light went on. The evaluation, the vendor's response to the RFI uses their terms, and the requirements themselves use the customer's terms. So there's one place where it translates between the two sets of technology.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the innovations, because this is the light went on for you.
Yeah.
What other innovations is Wayferry working on in this space?
Well, that reverse engineering was a big one. And coupled with that, we realized that for any given type of software, everybody has the same requirements. So that meant you can build libraries of requirements, which we found tremendously useful. One other innovation we've had is related to scope. Now, the trouble is when you're writing software, the sky's the limit as far as scope goes. But when you're buying software, you're limited to what's on the market. If you want something that does something that nobody makes, you're out of luck. So what we do is we've developed a tool that does the requirements management and the gap analysis. And after the vendors respond with RFIs, we look at the scores. And we've normalized it so 100% means every requirement is fully met. Now, if you're looking at ERPs, getting more than 90% is great. You're on a home run there. But if everything comes in at, say, 70% at best, then you've got to look at this and you say, what you're wanting to buy is more than the market provides. So either you need to reduce your scope or you need to find different software products. And usually the latter doesn't happen because they want things that are in there. And I'll give you an example. We were helping one client with a clinical trials management system, or a CTMS for short. And they were in the clinical trial space and obviously touched on FDA requirements and all that sort of thing. And one of the things they wanted was a document management that complied with 21 CFR Part 11, which is all to do with digital signatures and trusting them. And all of the CTMS vendors could do document management, but it was all basic document management. And they all said, if you want a Part 11 compliant system, buy a separate system and interface it to our CTMS. And so I pointed this out to the client, and they said, well, we've got a separate document management system. We're not fond of it. We'd love to change it. But yeah, we'll just interface that to it. And they took that out of the scope, and suddenly all the scores rose. And that's how you set the expectations, because you've got to bear in mind, if somebody buys some software and it meets their expectations, it doesn't have to go beyond it, as provided it meets it and there are no holes in it, they're going to be happy. But it's when when they're expecting something and it doesn't do it, that's when the unhappiness sets
What
in.
is the average deal size for these purchases? Are we talking in the hundreds of thousands or in the millions?
No, it goes into the millions usually.
And are those payment terms generally over? Is it like a
Well, if you're looking at enterprise software, which more than half of them tend to be ERP, is it in the cloud or is it in the data center? And it's moving to the cloud these days. So in the cloud, really, you've got basically your monthly cost per user plus your implementation. And you've got to look at that over 5 years. If you look at it in the data center, you've got purchasing the software, your annual maintenance, and your implementation. And purchasing software is more upfront, but less in the long term, whereas in the cloud is less upfront. And
so are you, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about my commercial real estate broker.
mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, when I need space, I go to him and to tell me what is out there. And he usually comes back with, well, what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
And I do my best effort to tell him we need this. I think we need 5,000 square feet. I think we're going to have about 20 people. And then he helps me adjust those. And then he goes and shops the landscape and then holds my hand as I am making the selection all the way through to the contract negotiation, all the way through to then me.
Right.
When I move, I'm on my own. But is that sort of, is that Wayferry?
That's very close, because what happens is when you go out and you look at properties, your needs change because it's seeing what's on the marketplace. You figure out, well, I value being close to town, but I really do not want the noise of living or of working next to a freeway. I didn't think a view was important, and these offices have a view over the Pacific.
And then suddenly it changes
everything changes, and that's you're essentially reverse engineering what's available on the market into your needs.
So, how many times do CIOs, CTOs tell you what they want, and they just need your validation, versus we think we need this CRM, or we know we need a CRM or ERP. We need your help.
It's much more than the latter, because if they're just looking for validation, they've already made up their mind, so there's not much I can do.
I think the latter has scored quite a bit in this podcast. 3 times now, the latter. The former, we need to find the comparison where the former wins.
Yes. But going on to innovations, there's another one that we've added that, and this comes out of the life science industry as well, is you've got the problem of software vendors misrepresenting themselves on RFPs or RFIs. How do you solve that? Well, again, the light bulb went on in the life science industry. And I got to say one thing. To me, seeing people and what they do is where the ideas come from. They don't sort of come from inside me. I just happen to recognize them out there and say, wow, I can use that. But to solve the problem of misrepresenting software, what we do is we take the vendor's response to the RFI and we select all the requirements that the client says are a showstopper. They're important. And that the vendor claims to meet 100%. And in our system, that scores 100% for those requirements. And then we go through the requirements and we say to the vendor, give us evidence that you meet these requirements one at a time. So show it to us in your documentation, show it to us in a training video or demonstration video, or give us a sandbox account where we can log in and check it for ourselves. And if we go through that and we find the score of the product drops from 100% to 98, 97, something like that, that's not the end of the world. But if it drops down to 80%, 70%, 60%, the vendor misrepresented their software. And I had that happen once with a...
Only once?
Let's not say it anymore. But this was the same clinical trials management company. And what happened was there are 2 types of clinical trial software out there. There's the bit that manages the trial itself. And for third-party companies that sell those services back to pharmaceutical companies, there's the financial bit on the top. And there were 2 vendors who said, oh, we do the financial bit on top, but they didn't. And I called out one of them afterwards, and I said to him, well, why did you say that? And he said, we just wanted to get in front of the client to do the demo. But they're a major software company in the US with and have a reputation for tough salespeople, and they're experts at winning CIOs over. And And when the problem is when you buy the software and you find it hasn't got that, well, that was the reason for the purchase.
Especially with those large deal values. That's very intense.
Yeah. And really, we look at it from the total cost. What's the ROI? And amazing, people don't consider, you're going to be spending $10 million, $20 million on software. What's the ROI? People don't even think about it. It's a huge investment.
So how long is the engagement with Wayferry?
For us, typically it depends. It's usually about 3 to 6 months, somewhere around there. It depends on the size of the project. But your ERPs tend to be longer. Those can take 6 to 9 months. It all depends on doing the requirements. Gathering the requirements is half the work, if not more.
If you're going to spend that much money, should companies just build their own software?
Never. Absolutely never. You always, unless you have a good reason for it, and I take Netflix, for example, with what faces the user, their portal. That is Netflix. They had to build that. They couldn't buy it from anyone. But Netflix bought the HR software, for example. And I know they actually now, I think it's using Workday. Previously it was Oracle in the background. I think that's right. But people in writing their own software, not only is there the cost of doing it initially, but there's the cost of maintenance. And if you can find somebody who's built some software that is close to your needs, then why not have the expense of that software amortized over dozens of customers?
And then, so what part does customization play then in your recommendation? Or you get the ERP, but then what seems to be you outsource all the customizations to the product.
The first thing you want to do is you want to find a close match with your needs. So that gets you well over halfway there. But there are two kinds of customizations, and I'll give you one is altering the source code, and the other is really configuring the thing to be your needs. And when I came to the US, we were up in the Bay Area, and I was working for a large company who can remain nameless. And they bought Oracle Financials. They were on Man, and they bought Oracle Financials, and they were a huge company. They had tens of thousands of employees around the world. And they had the idea, let's customize the Oracle Financials so we don't need to train anybody. And when you've got many tens of thousands, in fact, the company was larger than the South African army at that stage.
Can we edit that out? Just kidding.
Then it seemed like a reasonable idea until about 3 years later, they realized they couldn't upgrade it. So they had to pay all that money again to remove all those customizations and then upgrade. So that's why you don't want to customize.
Because that is it's like when you try to, when APIs get upgraded,
right.
You really don't refactor. You just have to switch to a new version of the API.
Right.
And so do you work with software that has 4GL? Like the 4GL languages, and a lot of ERPs try to help the customization aspect by just creating their own language.
To a little degree, but these days, if you go back 10, 15, 20 years, that was very common. But these days, especially with the rise of the consumer web, it's that world is changing.
Okay.
And especially with the startups, your big larger companies can sometimes be a bit like dinosaurs, and the new startups will choose a new technology underneath, and they're inspired by the products on the market, but they've just got much more effective tools to write it, so they can bring it to the market much faster. And that's why you keep on seeing the startups will suddenly overtake what's in the market. Look at Salesforce. They came up with their technology and they overtook what was everything that was in the market. And they became a leader. In fact, as far as I can see it, Salesforce kind of legitimized the cloud. And the company is leapfrog.
Benioff kind of invented SaaS, right? Kind of.
You could say that, yeah.
He would say that.
Yes. I recall somebody else saying they invented the internet.
Yes. So, well, he did put his name on some. Anyways, I won't go to that. Do you what is, and I kind of just from a business perspective, as you are an entrepreneur building your business, what are some of the top objections you get from your customers for either using your service or not going with your recommendations, or they do the 3 months with you and then it sort of peters out and it doesn't really.
We haven't.
As an entrepreneur, how do you manage that?
We haven't had that because we found a way to solve that, and it works. We won't work for a customer for free. The customer has to pay up front, and the reason we say that is very simple. Preparing a proposal for a customer is a lot of work, and in our requirements libraries, we bring a lot of work to the table. If we go into a customer and they've made no financial commitment, that's exactly what can happen. And it did happen. And that's where I learned. And so now we say to the customer, you have to pay a portion up front and a portion after so many weeks. And if the project takes longer, it's because you guys are slow. It's not because we guys are slow. So we're not taking that risk. You're taking that risk. If you're not prepared to do it, then you're on your own when you buy the software.
And how large is your team?
We have an elastic team, a number of core folks, and then we often bring on subject matter experts to help with particular aspects of evaluations. So that's how we get the industry vertical, and we go horizontal in terms of being any major type of
that was
software.
what I was going to ask you about, was the verticality requirement. How deep did you have to know and understand the domain?
You'll be amazed what you learn about a domain when you reverse engineer software. I mean, I'm not saying you learn everything, you don't, but you can certainly hold intelligent conversations with subject matter experts. Say, for example, you went into, some banking aspect for the first time. It takes you a while to learn the lingo and all that sort of thing, but when you bring the subject matter experts in and you teach them how to do the reverse engineering, and they teach you what's important in that industry. The value that subject matter experts bring is they've seen it all before. They know the gotchas in the industry and that kind of thing. The value we bring is we know how to do the software selection, how to reverse engineer the requirements. Because here is the number one problem of selecting software. People don't do the requirements properly. They get into the implementation. That's where the rubber meets the road. They discover so-called new requirements that they should have found earlier. It takes time to deal with them. So the schedule starts slipping, and eventually they reach, and that causes costs to increase. And eventually they reach the point where somebody tries to rein in the schedule because of all these new requirements coming in. So they start cutting functionality. So when they go live, that's what causes business disruption when they're going live. So if you can get it to the point where you capture all significant requirements up front, then you're not going to get any surprises during the implementation, which tends to be on time, on budget. And because it's doing everything you expect, there's minimal business disruption going live.
Do you aren't involved in the transition from, let's say, ERP A to ERP B, right?
We touch on that in the sense that the Wayferry consultant, sometimes the client hires that person to be their project manager in the implementation, but that's as far as we go. And the reason for doing that is this person now knows the organization inside out, having worked with them for several months, and they represent the client on the team.
I know the same biotech company I worked for made a few acquisitions, and at one point we had to upgrade. We were on Barn, and we had to upgrade from, I think, 3 to 4 or something back. But it was before Barn 5, which was the big change. And I remember internally we had our COO run the project. And it was laborious. I mean, all the functional areas, ad nauseum, going over the product master, the inventory master indexes, the procurement process. I mean, it was, talking about gathering the requirements being a point of failure. I mean, that is hard work.
It is. It's very hard work.
So, very quickly, when did you come to the States?
In the mid-90s.
Let the record reflect that he looked downwards and to his left. Isn't that a sign that you're bending the truth?
All right. No, October 95.
Okay, thank you. I came in 2000.
Okay.
2000. And what was it just a travel thing? Was it
It was my mother-in-law's fault. She wanted all her daughters to emigrate to the States. She got us on the green card lottery in South Africa, and amazingly, we all won one. And so we emigrated over.
It's shocking how many green card lottery winners I've met.
Yeah.
But then I realized, well, I wouldn't have met the losers, so...
Yeah.
I'm meeting all the winners.
Yes.
Because I'm in the States. And then, so the book, the book is Rethinking Enterprise Software Selection. And then I love the subtitle, Stop Buying Square Pegs for Round Holes. Tell me about the genesis of this book. And then, where can people find it?
Okay. Well, it's on Amazon. And I've deliberately kept the price very low so that people can buy it. But the subtitle that you like, it's actually, I was having lunch with the CIO, and it came out in the conversation, and the light went on. I was looking for a subtitle. And the title actually came from my wife. We were going for a walk in the park, and just came up with that and put it all together. But where it came from is I used to, in fact, I still do, when I get the chance, is write articles for CIO.com. And a number of people suggested I write a book, but I kind of put it off. And then I thought, well, I'll just compile the articles into a book. It'll take about a month or so. It took 10 months because I ended up doing so much rewriting, and I learned an incredible amount along the way. So I kind of put all the articles together, and it's organized in 3 main sections. The first one is why people go wrong with software selection. The second one is aspects of project management. And the third part is how to do it and what to do. Because there's so much advice out there that is way too high level to be useful. You need to know what to do, and you need to know why it works. And if you know why, then you have the power to change it and adapt it to your circumstances. But when somebody says something like, form an internal expert team on that particular aspect of the software, well, that's great. So now form the team. What do I do with it? And why they're important? And if you don't know that, it's meaningless. So, that's why high-level advice fails. So I've gone in there, and I've gone right down to the level of describing how to write requirements. Most people think of requirements as maybe half a line. No, it's way more than that. It's a requirement description. It's an example to give context. It's a reason why the requirement is wanted. It's any notes that pertain to that particular requirement and that sort of thing. And you got to gather it, and depending on your frame of mind, either in exquisite detail or excruciating detail, but it's detail.
I think it's the latter.
Because it's those details that get you. The devil's in the details. When you get to the implementation and something pops up that can't be done, and then you have to start working around, that's when you start sliding downhill.
So just to end off, are you saying people can't get you in a room unless they pay?
No, they can. I'm more than happy to talk to people, and I'll, if let's say it's a small company, I'm a small company needs some help, steer them to the book, steer them to our website.
Right.
And but if you're going to be asking me to put in hundreds of hours, then you got to pay.
I think you're right, and I think anecdotally, just being able to just have a informal discussion with you, I think is very enlightening, especially because this is a part of the process that is sort of the thing you don't really want to think about because you have this other thing you have to do, which is build your business and make a lot of money.
Yes.
And so I think this is a fantastic service.
Our mission is to help people make better software selections. Whether they use us or not doesn't really matter. But when somebody says to me, I bought your book, I followed what you did, and it worked, they're not happy.
I love it. Well, thank you, Chris. And we are going to put everything in the show notes, and we'll make sure that we point people in your direction.
Thanks so much, and thanks for asking me, Etienne.
Absolutely. Have you chatted with a CTO lately? Hi, thank you for listening to the CTO Studio. If you don't mind, take a quick second and please rate and review the show. It helps us a lot. Go to thectostudio.com for more information on what we're doing at 7 CTOs. We also have a video or two for you that could be a helpful resource for you as you're managing your company. So thank you for listening.